School of Business at the University of Utah. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the first in a series of seminars that help you navigate this COVID crisis and help you save your business. These seminars are being presented by the Mariner S. Eccles Institute for Economics and Quantitative Analysis at the University of Utah. And we're thrilled to be providing them to businesses all over the state of Utah and beyond, thanks to the leadership of Spencer Fox Eccles and a great donation from the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation. Today, you're going to be receiving a toolkit, things that you can do immediately to save your business. Now, the information you're going to receive is really an intellectual collaboration between the faculty at our school, Leavitt Partners, and the Cynosure Group. We've also been grateful to be informed by the governor's economic plan, Utah Leads Together. This plan posits 3 phases that we've got to manage through: an urgent phase, a stabilization phase, and a recovery phase. And we hope that you receive information on each one of those phases today. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Governor Gary Herbert. He will be followed by Spencer P. Eccles, who will introduce our host today, former Governor Mike Leavitt. Spencer is one of those business leaders whose ideas were the genesis for this webinar series. Governor Herbert, the time is yours.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the people of Utah, I want to thank you for the work you are doing to protect human health and support the Utah economy. We didn't ask for this challenge, but I know that Utah will emerge from it stronger and better than before. It's who we are. Under the guidance of my administration, a Utah Economic Response Task Force created Utah's plan for a health and economic recovery. It's called Utah Leads Together, and it draws upon the best thinking of business and policy experts from around the state. It's a dynamic plan for a dynamic situation. It provides clarity and specifics about Utah's plan for a health and economic recovery. It recognizes that as we strictly follow public health practices, markets correct, recessions end, and prosperity returns. It calls upon Utahns to take 3 actions. 1, rigorously follow public health guidelines. 2, stay engaged with the economy. And 3, assist those in need. We anticipate that Utah will progress through 3 phases of response: an urgent phase, which we're in right now, a stabilization phase, and a recovery phase. This forum deploys a critical strategy of the urgent phase, the gathering together of businesses to share impactful and actionable information that can help save businesses in this state. And let's be very clear, we are all in this together, and times like these bring out the best in Utahns. I'm grateful that the University of Utah, David Eccles School of Business, and the Eccles family have teamed up to bring you this important forum. I'm also appreciative of former Governor Mike Leavitt, who has served our state and our nation so honorably. I'm confident the practical information you learn today will help individuals and families in our state. It will also accelerate our economic recovery. As we lead together, we will beat this virus. Utah leads when we apply business intelligence to our challenges like we are doing today. Utah leads when we reach out and help the most vulnerable among us. Utah leads when we focus on a future with stronger social bonds and restored economic strength. While we now face unprecedented challenges, Utah will adapt. Utah will innovate, and together, Utah will lead and overcome. This is a time for Utah to shine. Thank you for joining together to restore your businesses and our state to full economic health.
Thanks, Governor. We really appreciate your leadership and your collaborative efforts to help us all through this crisis. It seems so appropriate that today's effort is launching through the Mariner S. Eccles Institute for Economic and Quantitative Analysis at the David Eccles School of Business. Nearly 100 years ago, Mariner had to navigate and lead through another time of economic peril. First, as a business leader, and then as the chairman of the Federal Reserve during the Great Depression. His description of what he felt at that time reflects the sentiments that many of us are feeling today. And I quote, "During 1930, I awoke to find myself at the bottom of a pit without any known means of scaling its sheer sides. But just as Mariner successfully led his companies and the country out of the Depression, we too can lead our families, our communities, and our businesses through this health and economic crisis, and importantly, back to strength and prosperity. As a family under our father's leadership and through the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation, we felt it imperative to help the business community where we could, joining together with Governor Leavitt and with Dean Randall, and drawing on the deep expertise of the Mariner S. Eccles Institute at the University of Utah. A series of discussions have been developed to help business leaders, large and small, receive an actionable, timely framework to help navigate this immediate crisis, as well as plan to get through to the other side. We are fortunate to have Governor Mike Leavitt, the former Secretary of Health and Human Services under President George W. Bush, leading this effort. While at HHS, Governor Leavitt developed a comprehensive pandemic plan for this country. His experience and leadership, coupled with the Mariner S. Eccles Institute's expertise and other boots-on-the-ground experts, will give you the much-needed strategic and practical tools to navigate this challenge and rebuild your business and our community. Governor Leavitt.
Well, thank you, Spencer. Here we are, all of us appropriately socially distanced and right in the middle of a pandemic. As Spencer said, my experience with pandemics started when I was Secretary of Health for the United States. Scientists around the world and those who focus on infectious diseases had become very interested in a virus known as the H5N1. It was a flu virus. And they had concerns that it had pandemic potential. What became evident was that we were not prepared yet as a country for this to occur. So the Congress appropriated $7 billion, and for the next 3 years, I spent developing, as he suggested, a pandemic plan that's still the foundation of our nation's response. There's something very unique about a pandemic. In other emergencies that I was part of, 9/11 or Katrina, for example, the federal government's plan was to call the states and deploy assets from the states to the scene of the event. Well, the dilemma, of course, in a pandemic is that it's happening virtually everywhere at the same time. This is a uniquely local experience. Well, people would often ask me, are we prepared? And when they asked me, I think they were thinking about the government. But there's a role for everyone here. And the better question is, are you prepared? Is your family prepared? Is your business prepared? As I went from city to city delivering that message, I got a little unexpected help. One day I was giving a speech on family preparedness, and I made the point that it's a good idea to have a little contingency supply of food in a home. To make the point, I said, if you're going to go to the store and buy tuna fish, get a little extra. And then to illustrate that it was important to put it aside, I said, and put it under your bed. I made the same point about powdered milk. Well, I don't know if the reporter was impressed by my advice. She wrote an article on it, but Jay Leno thought it was just the advice he was looking for. And I became the subject of the famous Jay Leno monologue 3 nights in a row. 3 nights in a row. The first night, Leno said, Secretary Mike Leavitt, he says we ought to be preparing for a pandemic by putting tuna fish and powdered milk under our beds. Then he said, tuna fish and powdered milk. I think I'd rather have the flu. Well, night 2, Leno. Leavitt said we should have some tuna fish and powdered milk under our bed. If that's his idea of a pandemic plan, you can just Starkiss your ass goodbye. Then, night 3, Leno. I made a big mistake last night. I got hungry in the middle of the night, and I ate the tuna fish and the powdered milk that was under my bed. And Leno went to his famous chin and said, tuna fish and powdered milk. Isn't that what they call clam chowder at Red Lobster? Well, I had spent many, many days traveling the country trying to deliver that message, and Jay Leno got the job done in just 3 nights. Our purpose today is not to talk about tuna fish and powdered milk, but it is to talk about a plan. It's about a plan to save our businesses. Now, I'm fairly confident that COVID-19 wasn't part of the business risk that you were thinking about a year ago when you put together your annual plan and your budget. But here we are. Naturally, many will be wondering, are we making too big a deal out of this? Is it necessary really to close businesses and schools and activities? Millions are going to be displaced in their jobs. Business momentum is very quickly slowing down. Social distancing is hard and it's uncomfortable, but it works. The answer is yes. The potential human loss and the social disruption that comes from a pandemic is so significant that this kind of bold action has to be taken. And the truth is, until we have a vaccine and other medications, social distancing strategies like the ones we're practicing right now are all we have. Pandemics happen. They're a fact of biologic life. They are a testament to history. When they occur, the impact is significant. It impacts the economy of the world. It affects the politics and the way they operate. It affects the sociology. And we're experiencing that right now. One consistent thing among all the pandemics that have occurred, and there have been dozens of pandemics over the course of the last 500 years, in every case, the world changed in profound and important ways. And we have to respond. We're at war with this virus, and we will, in fact, be successful. Now, it should not go without mentioning that the people of the United States of America and the people of Utah are responding in remarkable ways. In our collective hardship, there is a renewed unity of purpose that is sweeping across this nation, and we're all part of it. Just months ago, it would have been unimaginable to think that the Congress, divided by politics, could unite in such a historic way to give our country a path forward. We need to properly appreciate as well the efforts that are being made by healthcare workers and who are caring for those who do in fact fall victim to this very difficult condition. We need to acknowledge both the challenge and the obligation that all of us have to do our part to rekindle the businesses that provide the way of life that we all lead. The same sense of entrepreneurship that created Utah's recent economic success will also be the force that empowers us to recover. Now, I'd like to just offer one suggestion. I have learned, after having managed through a lot of emergencies, that there is always uncertainty at moments like this. To overcome uncertainty, one needs to make a list of the things that are uncertain. It's important then to replace that uncertainty with a set of assumptions, your best estimation based on the best available information. By doing so, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be directionally correct. And in a moment like this, we're constantly needing to reiterate and to change based on new information. What's important is getting started. Now, our objective today is to simply help you get started with that list. We want to talk about some of the circumstances that exist around COVID-19 and some of the decisions that you will need to make and information that you will need. And as Dean Randall suggested, things you can do today. So during this presentation, you're going to hear from a respected scientist who will tell you that COVID-19 is not a one and done 3-month problem. It's a new risk that we're all going to have to factor into our business planning going forward. You'll hear from an economist who will describe the options that you have to manage the very sensitive process that happens when you have to do workforce reductions. The CEO of Utah's World Trade Center will tell you how to get access to federal stimulus funds, things that will help keep the business alive and go through this difficult transition. Dean Randall of the Eccles School of Business will talk about something that's important to everyone, supply chain. A seasoned banker will then give us very seasoned advice on conversations that we need to have today with people who provide us with credit. An expert on customer relationships will provide a list of very important critical actions that need to be taken to protect your revenue. And then we'll hear from a seasoned crisis managing executive, someone we all know, Mitt Romney, who will tell us a few stories about and offer some wisdom on how to manage during a period like this. As we go forward, you'll see there's an opportunity to ask questions. You'll note the chat function. We're going to have a period after the presentations where you can ask questions. We'd ask you to tee those up as we go. I'll continue to remind it. You can find it at the bottom of your screen. So let's get started. Our first presentation today will come from Dr. Stephen Alder, who is at the University of Utah as a health ecologist. Steve?
Thank you, Secretary Leavitt. Yeah, and as you mentioned in your introduction, the COVID-19 pandemic is not something that is going to go away very soon. There's a lot of information that's coming out all the time, and so what I'd like to do is present at least a few principles and some information that we do know as other information comes online. First of all, we are past containment. When a virus like this gets around the world in pandemic form, our opportunity to contain is past. And so now we're in a strategy where we are trying to manage the distribution of the infections and the resulting illness that comes from this virus, SARS-CoV-2, or this new form of coronavirus. Now, as Secretary Leavitt noted, we can take measures, social distancing. There are other measures we can take that can help us to reduce the transmission. The stay at home and the other restrictions that we are undertaking right now are helping to reduce the rate of transmission and therefore reduce the burden that we have on different systems like our healthcare system. The measures we're taking, especially if people adhere to those measures, are very effective. Yet when we start to lift those measures, we have to be prepared that rates will rise. And we have to think about how we adapt so that in the post-restriction era, we can still manage COVID-19. There are a few characteristics of this virus that are helping us to know how we might need to work forward. Now, for many who are infected, COVID-19 or a SARS-CoV-2 infection will be mild. And when we talk about mild, this means everything from not even realizing the infection has occurred, so no symptoms or very mild symptoms, all the way to uncomfortable but not life-threatening symptoms. That's good and bad. That's good because for many people, their experience will not be as detrimental as others. It's bad because there are people in our communities who are circulating with the virus and they don't know they have it and we don't know they have it. And so that's part of the reason we need to be taking these measures. There are some efforts underway in the state of Utah, testutah.com. If you go there, there's an effort called Crush the Curve, where we're trying to get a better understanding of what's circulating in the community. And there's a way to assess as well as determine who might need to be tested. And I'd encourage you to look at that website. In order to stop the circulation beyond our restrictive measures, we need to achieve something called herd immunity. Herd immunity is where a sufficient number of people in the community are immune to the disease so that they will not become infected, and so the infection does not have a chance to circulate. Right now, we understand that SARS-CoV-2, for each person that's infected, they will infect 2 to 2.5 more people. If we get up to, say, 55 or 60% of the community having immunity, which comes from either having the infection and recuperating or getting vaccinated, and as Secretary Leavitt noted, we do not yet have a vaccine. We also do not have treatments at this point. Then the virus won't have the chance to circulate. That will take some time, and our hope is that we have other mechanisms for doing that beyond just simply having people infected. But in the meantime, what we need to do is make sure that we flatten, or as they're saying on Silicon Slopes, crush the curve so that we can have a lower demand on the support systems that help us all. So what can we expect? Well, we can expect this to be a long-term challenge, that we need to be prepared for COVID-19 to be around longer than 6 months, and that we need to be prepared to adapt and have periodic restrictions taking place during that time. There are efforts to try and identify communities where there is high transmission, medium transmission, low transmission, sort of red, yellow, green communities where efforts will be undertaken to respond to those conditions. And we need to recognize that social restrictions do appear to be working, yet we need to continue our efforts, and we need to try and adhere to the extent possible so that we can all be part of the solution. So as we move forward, a few takeaway points. First, follow guidelines. These guidelines can be as simple as hand washing, cleaning surfaces, trying to retain from touching our faces, 6-foot differences, lowering crowds, those sorts of things. We're also hearing that there may be a request that people, when they go out, wear a mask. That is to protect others in case we happen to be infected and we don't know it. The second is to prepare for the pandemic to last beyond 6 months. Adaptations are going to be needed. We need to be prepared to be adaptable and keep abreast of the information. And then finally, support efforts to reduce transmission. When we're asked to do things, if we can be part of the solution, we are going to help not only ourselves, but those around us. Thank you.
Steve, thank you. That was a great presentation. I want to tell you the things that I took away. If I'm trying to save my business today and in the coming months, this idea that it's not simply a 3-month, 4-month, 2-month, whatever it is, done, one and done, this is a new risk that's now part of the earth on which we live. And that we will likely go through periods where there will be new opportunities for us to socially distance and to try those tools that we're learning. I've thought about it in my own mind that there could be, I go to New York a lot, or to Washington, D.C., or someplace east of here, and there'll be winter storm warnings. This city's basically shut down because of the storm. It seems possible we may see periods when there will be a COVID warning, a hotspot, and they'll use social distancing measures to begin to give some relief. So am I seeing this correctly? This is a condition we're going to see going forward. And then as I start thinking about my supply chain and my banking relationships and the way I'm organizing my business, that I ought to be thinking not just about now, but in the future. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. There are some models that will tell us near term that, for instance, in Utah, where if we keep the restrictions in place, we're likely to peak around the 22nd of April with as many as 17, although the estimates go as high as 30 or more deaths per day until we start to have these restrictions kick in. But then after that, we have to remember that that's not the end, that we have to continue thinking about how to adapt and how to work within the conditions we find ourselves.
Well, thank you. As I've studied pandemics throughout the course of history, there's almost always a second and sometimes a third wave. So we're going to learn to manage this problem, not necessarily to solve it in the short run. Well, thank you, Steve. For our second presentation, as I mentioned, we'll have an opportunity to hear from Myles Hansen, who is president and CEO of the World Trade Center here in Utah. Myles is going to tell us about some of the immediate help we can get from the government. Myles?
Great. Thank you, Governor Leavitt, for convening today's forum, and a big thanks to the Eccles family for making this possible. You know, Governor, just yesterday morning, I was thinking about a quote that we're all familiar with by President Ronald Reagan. He said that the most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." And yet here I am to talk about exactly what these government programs truly can do to help companies right now in Utah. And my purpose over the next few minutes is to make this process a little less terrifying by breaking down what these programs are and by pointing people to where they can get support here in the state for going through this process. So first off, the $2 trillion CARES Act. We're all familiar with it. It was passed by Congress last Friday, signed into law by the president. It has been operationalized throughout the week. Within there are three key elements that every business in the state of Utah needs to be aware of and engaging on right now. The first one I'll talk about is the Paycheck Protection Program. This program is designed to keep people on the payroll. And with the broader stimulus package, really what the intent is we pause many elements of our economy with this stimulus package to the extent to which we can keep businesses open, keep them paying their rent, their utilities, paying their people. We will be positioning ourselves to then, once we get to the tail end of this, the challenge we're facing on COVID-19, to press play again on the economy and to pick back up and move forward in a very expeditious manner. And so the Paycheck Protection Program is designed to help companies do exactly that. Who's eligible? As you can see on the screen, it's companies with employees with less than 500 employees. Right now, today, you can reach out to your bank and begin the application process. The way you determine what you are eligible for is by taking your average monthly payroll, timesing that by 2.5, and it's capped at $10 million. That then tells you what you can get through this program. And now the great thing for Utah businesses and for businesses across the country is that as long as you use these funds for what they're designed for, again, to pay your people, pay your rent, mortgage interest, and your utilities, this loan will be forgiven, the extent to which you do that. And so this now is an opportunity, as many companies are experiencing significant reductions in revenue, to bridge the gap until we can get the economy going again. And again, the program's opening up today. There have been some challenges this week working with Treasury and SBA. Senator Romney's team has been very much engaged to help move the process along. The rules for the program came out late last night. I talked with Scott Anderson of Zions Bank earlier today. They are planning on opening up applications later on this afternoon and then planning to be able to process those so money gets to businesses who apply as soon as Tuesday of next week. The other program that we want to make everybody aware of is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. These loans you apply for directly with the SBA. So let me just clarify that one more time. The PPP loans, go to your bank and go there today, right now, to figure out what the process is. The Economic Injury Disaster Loans, reach out to the SBA. They have a new website. You see it there on their screen, a streamlined process to get through these applications very quickly. This loan can be for up to $2 million. If you apply for the PPP program, you can't apply for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program to cover the same expenses, but you can apply to cover other expenses that you are experiencing right now. So it's a way for businesses to get some additional money. There are not right now provisions to provide forgiveness for these loans, but the terms are very favorable, 3.75%. And so for companies that need more than just that 2.5 times their payroll, this is a very attractive option and something we recommend that you engage in. The third element that I will just very briefly touch on is that in the CARES Act, there were many changes, temporary changes to our tax policies that enable businesses to amend the previous 2 years' returns to claim additional net operating losses from the past, carry those forward, and also to write off qualified improvements to property, the full value as depreciation. So right now, talk to your tax people, dig into these options, because you can go back, amend your returns from the previous years, and as soon as the IRS can process it, you can get some additional cash back and an additional refund based off of those amended returns. The last thing I will touch on here very briefly is that the state of Utah has been very much engaged in creating their own program to help businesses right now. It is the Utah Leads Together Bridge Loan Program. It's put together by the Governor's Office of Economic Development. That application period is open now. It's for companies with less than 50 employees, so our smallest businesses. Jump on to the state's website. I'll talk about that in a second. You can get between $5,000 and $20,000, 0% interest for 5 years. And so again, all these programs designed to get cash to companies now so they can stay in business and jump back in the economy when things open up. And finally, again, you see on your page on the screen there, for these details and additional assistance, go to coronavirus.utah.gov/business. We have set up a rapid response team. And so when you go to that website, if you have additional detailed questions or you have problems that you're facing engaging these programs, there is a button you can submit to request help, fill out the form. A member of our rapid response team will be in touch with you to help hold your hand as you go through this process to get to access these government programs and resources. So Governor Leavitt, back over to you.
Thank you. So if you're at home and you're trying to think through how you're going to save your business, Myles has given you 4 important things that you can do today. The first is the paycheck protection. Call a bank that's an SBA qualified lender. They'll help you make an application this afternoon. Second, you can check with the SBA itself if you qualify for an economic disaster loan. Third, call your tax preparer. There are little benefits that are actually now there for you to get today by being able to amend your previous tax returns. And fourth, go to the website, coronavirus.utah.gov/business, bookmark it, because there's a lot of information there that you're going to need in weeks to come. Now, I will remind you that if you have a question for Myles, or if you have a question for Steve or any of the other presenters, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there is a chat feature. Pull it up, write your question, and we'll deal with the questions when we get to the end. All right, let's go to our next presenter. This is Scott Schaefer. Scott is a very distinguished economist and professor at the Mariner S. Eccles Institute for Economics and Quantitative Analysis here at the University of Utah. And Scott is going to help us work through some of those sensitive issues that might be facing you if you have to reduce your workforce. Scott?
Thank you, Governor Leavitt. As an economist and a business professor, I'm going to talk briefly about the broad economic aims of what Congress is trying to do, and then I'll get into the brass tacks of what businesses should be doing now with regard to their workforce. And so in order to have a healthy economy, you need healthy people, and you also need healthy firms. You need healthy people because economic output is just the output of all the people in the country. But businesses are extremely important as well because they're the productive units of the economy. In normal situations, healthy people, healthy businesses, those things go together. And the problem we're facing right now is that the things we need to do to keep our people healthy are exactly the kind of things that make life very, very difficult on business. So the intent of the CARES Act is to provide a way for you to preserve your business through the crisis. The Congress does not want our businesses shutting down, and you should interpret the CARES Act as an attempt by the government to essentially pay your essential expenses over the next short period while the economy is shut down. Now, for an individual manager thinking about making human resource management decisions, if you're a business where your demand has fallen off, then a typical thing would be to look for places to cut expenses, and headcount is often a starting point. We've definitely seen that in Utah. We saw 28,000 new unemployment claims this past week after 19,000 the week before. We have been averaging around 1,200 to 1,800 over the previous several months. And so lots of layoffs happening right now. You're probably thinking, okay, well, could I do that? Could I not do that? Right? These are some of the hardest decisions that managers ever have to make. What am I going to do with these people whose livelihoods depend on me? There are no easy answers in situations like this. One thing that the Congress has done is they have enriched the unemployment insurance benefits by extending the period for 13 weeks and also by adding up to $600 per week in benefits for those that are laid off. And so for firms that are choosing to let employees go, the federal government is stepping in to provide additional assistance to those workers. Other firms are thinking about doing furloughs. A furlough is like a layoff. It just gives the employees a specific date on which we're going to intend to hire you back. Furloughed employees are also eligible for unemployment insurance. And so if a furlough is part of your plan, the way that has been for Park City Mountain Resort, for example, and the Utah Symphony, make sure to direct employees to unemployment insurance. However, the CARES Act is encouraging you to keep employees on the payroll. The CARES Act will pay payroll expenses, it will pay rent, it will pay utilities, it will pay mortgage interest, but only if you keep your payroll intact. If you let all of your workers go, then you are not going to be eligible for the full forgiveness associated with the loans as part of the CARES Act. And so I would very much encourage you to study the details of the CARES Act and try to find a way to keep your employees around to get access to those low interest and forgivable loans if you are eligible. The reason for that is that we want to keep our productive units together. Your employees are well trained to be able to execute on your particular business's needs. And so the intent of the CARES Act is to keep those productive units together so that your employees don't scatter to the wind, so that we can rise together out of this. I would say another point for managers to consider is the following. As Steve mentioned, we're probably looking at a stop and start economy over the near term. If we are all able to get back to work in a few weeks, it's possible at least that we'll see additional flare-ups down the road. You might want to spend some time, if you have downtime right now, thinking about how would I manage in a stop and start world. This is going to be requiring you to think about employee scheduling. This is going to be requiring to think about how you might adapt your operations to respond to fluctuating demand. This is going to require you to think about what employees are really essential to keeping things going. Okay, it's probably going to mean that there's a premium to be placed on generality and flexibility over and above quality. So just to wrap up, I would say focus on the CARES Act and see if there's a way to keep your employees on the payroll, to keep eligible for that, and then plan for flexibility as we emerge from this crisis. Back to you, Governor.
Thank you, Scott. I think this is happening to a lot of businesses that never thought they would be in this situation. Businesses that are well capitalized, that have been profitable, that are moving forward. I have observed in many years of business that running a successful business is a lot like riding a bike. If you can keep enough speed, you can stay up. But when the speed slows down, things start to wobble. And when they start to wobble, they have to be stabilized. And this is a process of being able to stabilize and keep the speed and keep the businesses up and ready to rebound, bringing back employees that have been there. The idea of getting well acquainted with this CARES Act is a vitally important for those of you who are out trying to save the business, trying to keep the momentum going. Scott's point about $600 a week being added to the unemployment benefit and 13 additional weeks. That's a really big deal, because it means that if we are required to be able to separate from some employees to be able to keep the business going, there's a way in which you can do so as an employer, knowing that they will have help. None of us want that to happen, but when it does, it's a good thing for that help to be there. And the benefits that Myles spoke of are available. This is a very important part of how we save our businesses. So thank you, Scott. You did a really nice job with that. Remember, if you've got a question for Scott, look for the chat function underneath. And we're now going to go on to talk about supply chain. And we'll have Dean Randall here at the business school talk about supply chain. Taylor, help us save our business.
Thanks, Governor Leavitt. You know, supply chains absolutely hate disruption. And this may be one of the largest disruptions we will see globally in supply chains. I've got family in the southern United States, and they experience hurricanes all the time. This may be the first time some of us have experienced hurricane-type disruption in our supply chains. I think you've got to think of this in terms of an urgent phase and a more stable phase. Let's start first with the urgent phase. You've got to realize that not only do supply chains deliver products, but they also gobble up a lot of your cash. And right now, you need to know where your cash is. I would highly recommend putting together a multidisciplinary team of finance, operation, and sales, and then just put up a list. Who am I collecting from right now? And who have I got to pay? And then you've got to start making some tough decisions. If you can reach out to suppliers and extend payments, that's going to add cash to your business. If you can collect early by offering customers some deals, that's going to bring cash to your business. One of my favorite suppliers, an outdoor products company in Park City, just announced yesterday a survival sale. They reduced the prices on their products by over 50%. You might think that is completely illogical, but on the other hand, if they're facing very little demand, if they can turn that inventory into cash immediately, that's going to give them and extend their runway for their business survival. Now, the trick here as you're looking at the short term is you got to be wary of the long-term consequences. If people think you're not going to pay long-term, you may not get product long-term. So now let's shift to week 2. After you get through that urgent panic, what have you got to start thinking about? Well, I think you've got to start thinking strategically. I appreciated the words of Scott Schaefer and Steve Alder about this pandemic going to be around a while. We're going to see waves of this. And so I think you need to analyze and realize that this is causing both demand shocks and supply shocks. And that causes shortages on both sides. What do we mean by a supply shortage? Well, for those of you that went to buy toilet paper and couldn't find it, that's a supply shortage. For those of you that wanted to go to a restaurant or own a restaurant and there's nobody in your restaurant right now, that's a demand shortage. You've got to deal with those in very different ways. What's tricky about this, however, is the same company may be suffering from demand shocks and supply shocks at the same time. Look at hospitals for a second. Their supply chain to try to deal with COVID-19 is just maxed. There's shortages of protective equipment. On the other hand, their supply chains dealing with regular healthcare are empty because they've got to use that capacity for COVID-19. And so they're dealing with demand shortages. You may even see in your own supply chains periods of demand versus supply shortages. Think about an electronics company that sources from China. China's supply chains went down about 3 months ago. They're now back up, but our customers are gone here in the United States because we're not going to retail outlets. This makes it really, really tricky. So once you've analyzed that, start thinking about every component that comes into your product. Where is it coming from in the supply chain? Triage it, understand those different risks, and then start to take action. What's interesting about the action, however, is that's going to take capital and that's going to take some money. When you build inventory to make sure you're not short, That's more capital. And so the trick in the short term is you got to maximize the capital to keep you going, but then you're going to have to shift in the long term to start building some buffers and some redundancy to make sure you've got supply to manage this as time goes on. That'll be the trick.
Well, Taylor, thank you. If you're at home and you are looking to save your business, I picked up 3 important things there. The first is call your suppliers now. Talk to them. Figure out where they are in this process, what they can deliver, what they can't. Second thing I heard was think longer term. You may have to change the strategy that you use on supply chain. It might require that just-in-time inventory process that you've been using for a while may not work perfectly any longer during the period of a pandemic, which likely be longer than we hope it would be. And then lastly, I heard the dean say, you might want to think through whether they're going to be around or not. They're facing the same things you are. And so check their financial capacity to remain a steady supplier. Did I get it right, Taylor?
Boy, you nailed it. Well done.
Well, thank you. If you've got questions that you'd like to ask the dean on supply chain, look at the chat. You know how to pull it up. Give us questions. And until that time, we'll keep going. We're now going to talk to a seasoned banker, Jill Taylor, who is the chief sales officer at Stamp It Up, a great Utah business, and formerly the president of Key Bank. Jill is a person who's sat on both sides of the desk and been through periods like this before. Jill, save our business.
That's a lot of pressure, Governor. But I will say I have been on both sides. I'm living it right now. We've had many, many days in our executive leadership team of talking about these same issues. And so I really appreciate the University of Utah and the Equity Foundation for helping put this together. First, I will just share that from a bank perspective, the best thing that you can do is make sure that we are true partners. And from our perspective as bankers, what that means is we really need to have confidence in your management team. This is when it's about how you can lead through these instances. We get confidence in management team of businesses through a few key ways. First of all, knowing that you and your team are industry and business experts, that you really know the business that you're in, that you have shown over time your ability to manage through different risk situations as well as different opportunities. Because like it or not,
Jill, to prove that this is live and authentic, I'm going to tell you that we're having a bit of an audio problem, a little bandwidth, perhaps in your neighborhood, in this social distance world. So we're going to ask you to start again because I was picking it up, but I'm not sure everyone. These are vital points. So would you give it a whirl again?
Absolutely. Thank you. As I was saying, is our business that I'm with now is living the same thing that you're living, and we're having the same conversations about what can we do to survive and thrive through this. And so I really appreciate this forum being put together. As I talk to you from my banker world and some experience I've had there, there's some key things that I would share with you, and I would position it in 2 different ways. I'm going to talk about old news because there's some things that are always have been and they're still the same, and then there's some new news that I think is exciting and will help us get through this. So from an old news perspective, what we look for as bankers is really knowing that we've got a partnership with our businesses. As business owners, you are best able to help us really understand your business. If you understand your business and you're the industry expert and you have shown how you've managed past risks and how you've managed past opportunities for growth, that helps us build confidence and be able to really trust in a lot of ways what you're presenting as opportunities and risks and how you'll work through them. Communication is absolutely key. And some of the ways that you communicate might be verbally, might be through email, but really your financial statements say a lot. So if I had one piece of advice right now, if your 2019 financial statements are not available, please make sure that you have those wrapped up and ready to go. And I apologize, it looks like video's gone off. Can you still hear me, Governor? Okay, we'll keep going. The second thing that I would share is, in terms of financial statements, is being able to give some really good quality business projections and being proactive and responsive to the business and to the bank. So if you can really partner with your banker, you will be in better shape. Now, I compare it to going to the doctor every year, and I hate going and getting all of my numbers tested, especially the one on the scale. And yet that's an important number for me to know to better manage my health. And it's an important one for my doctor to know to help me better manage my health. Please call your banker soon. Get in front of them. Make sure that you're not waiting until the last ditch effort of something's, the sky is falling. They can help you work through this. Here's the new news that you would want to know. Thanks to 2008 and the Great Recession that I had the opportunity to be the president of the bank during, we are better prepared as a whole financial system. Banks now have more capital, they have more liquidity, they've gone through the stress testing, they're in a better position. In fact, the Federal Reserve has even said, we're going to collateralize, we'll see if we can extend that collateralization of commercial mortgages that helps put some more capital and liquidity back into the system. There are resources available. You heard about them from Myles in terms of some of the new loan programs and that PPP, and that today is the day that you can officially start applying for those. Many of the banks have set up sort of an online portal that you can go through and pre-register for that allows you to get in line, if you will, to start that application process. So if you haven't registered, I don't think it's too late. There's a real quick form that will help you get through that. There are also a number of deferral programs. So on SBA, for example, 7A and 504s have a potential 6-month deferral. If you have one of those loans, I would be asking my banker about that and how you could get that deferral in place. I will also share something that is very different from 2008, and that is that the regulatory guidance is much different. So in 2008, the guidance we were given was you've got to hurry and work through these troubled assets. You've got to get them into your special assets group, get them off the books. We need to stabilize credit quality. And what banks are hearing now is work with customers. You've got more capital, you've got more liquidity, work with the customers. Now, know that as you're working with your banker, they're going to do some enhanced due diligence. Some of that enhanced due diligence may be around digging in even deeper around your liquidity of the business. It may be asking you if you personally are willing to inject more personal liquidity into the business as well. They're going to want to know what the specific impact of COVID-19 has had on your business. So if your business was struggling before and now you are wanting to take advantage of some of those programs, they're really meant for those that have been impacted by the pandemic. If you had some troubles before, they may not be as easy to access. And the last thing I would say is just be patient. As you can imagine, phones will be ringing off the hook. We as business leaders are all in this mode of how can we get things settled, and your banker is an important partner with that. They are being slammed and they will have a ton of applications to work through, and they have tried to put systems in place to help make that more automated, but be patient and keep the communication open. Thank you, Governor.
Well, thank you, Jill. Jill, I heard a couple of pieces of very important advice from a seasoned banker. One is that no one is benefited by a non-performing loan or a relationship that's not what you would desire it to be. And so ask your banker to help you, give them a plan, show them that you have a future. Having a plan is a key to this, isn't it?
Absolutely. And there, really, if your loan, if you can't pay your loan, not only do you lose, but the bank loses as well. So our goal as bankers is to help it so that we can both hit the measures that we need to, and we can both come out of this winners.
So I heard you say that some updated financial information would be useful. And I would guess that would also apply by just keeping them posted on your progress as you work your plan. Working with them as a partner, it sounds to me, is a key to saving your business.
I believe that is true. Yes.
Great. Well, thank you, Jill. You did a good job under some duress. Thank you for We've all been on video, on large video conferences like this before and know the problem. So remember, if you've got a question for Jill, just go to the chat function and we'll be taking your questions in just a few minutes. We're now going to talk about customer relationships. And Andrea Thomas, who is a professor of marketing, assistant dean of undergraduate studies at the David Eccles School of Business, and I might add a veteran of Walmart who knows something about customer relationships. Andrea, save our business.
Thank you, Governor Leavitt. So customers vary quite a bit business to business. Sometimes they're other businesses and at other times they're individuals. The thing that's happening currently in this pandemic is that everybody is under stress. Disruptions have become huge and everybody's thinking about different ways to manage their lives right now. Changes that last over several weeks or several months start to create new behaviors. And so I think it's very important for businesses to really understand how their customers are addressing the issues and the challenges that they have right now. So there's several things that you can do to help connect with your customer. The first is just simply understanding that uncertainty is stressful. We talked about that in supply chains, and the same holds true for customers. And so if you can be empathetic and patient and understand the needs of your customers, that can help you know how you can help them and how you can create the relationship that will last through this pandemic. So right now, customers are adjusting to a new normal. They know that they need to be flexible to figure out how to solve their problems or address their needs. Soon, they're going to settle into these patterns of behavior. So engaging with them now will help you be there for them as they make this adjustments. So you have to, in your tone of communication, whether it's a conversation with your customers, whether it's the sign that you put outside your store, the email that you send, or if you have advertising out there, you just have to know that you need to adjust your tone. If you're running ads or if you've got verbiage that you've used before the pandemic, it really seems out of place right now, knowing what people are going through. So just take a double look at every way that you're talking to your customers and make sure that you're adjusting your tone so that it's relevant for what people are going through right now. You need to communicate frequently and transparently. That's going to help you build trust, and it's also going to help you be there for your customers so that the relationship that you have will be enduring. So examples of this. It's a great time right now to look at the email list that you maybe have collected and communicate and send regular messages out. If you haven't done a social media group, then you might want to start one. If you have a social media group, a Facebook group, an Instagram group, getting in there and talking to people and being there for them during this time will help as well. So I have a neighborhood nursery that I really like that I had signed up as a consumer to just get, frequent emails and discounts. And they just sent me an email that talked to me about how I should plan on planting my gardens this year during a pandemic. They've done several new things. They're closed, but they said, email us a list. Tell us when you're coming. We'll bring them out to your car. So they're reiterating the social distancing process with how they can help me, because I'll be ready to plant my garden. And, I have a lot more time to plant because I'm at home more. So these are examples of ways that you can just really connect with your customer base. It's always more enduring if you have an emotional connection versus a transactional connection with your customers. So use this time to understand what they're going through, to change your tone, to maybe make some adjustments for them so that you can have this emotional engagement with them. Because they don't want to feel, rational satisfaction feels more like you're just checking the box, or you're there just to collect the money that they're wanting to give them. So, thinking about the ways you can connect emotionally. One of the other things that can help here is considering the customer lifetime value of your customers. So if you've got customers that have been with you for a long time or have the potential to be with you for a long time, you might want to really think about how you treat them and how you might adjust things like payment terms or your return policies or cancellation policies. So not everybody is going to be your most valuable customers, but the ones who are, make sure you're doing everything you possibly can to keep that relationship going. Finally, you need to be adaptable, and you don't want to compromise your brand purpose or your company's purpose. But when everything's changing right now, people are accelerating their adoption of new technologies. You know, right now, the only way you can shop in a lot of categories is through e-commerce. So that has accelerated people's comfort with e-commerce. So if you are disadvantaged, if people are moving to more technology or they're moving to more e-commerce, now's the time to think about planning your business going forward and maybe doing some innovation or another way that you can serve those customers so that you can actually take this time and think of it as potentially an opportunity for you to go into maybe a different line of business or a different way that your customers can be served by your business. So these are just a few ideas. I think the headline is be patient, be empathetic, communicate a lot, be very transparent in your communication, and then look at this, if you can, as an opportunity to deepen your emotional connection with your customers.
Well, Andrea, I heard the message, in a pandemic, patterns change. I mentioned earlier that in every pandemic in history, economics have changed, politics has changed, and sociology has changed. And this relationship between businesses and their consumers is very much driven by this change in sociology. And what I heard you say is, basically, if you're not online, you better get there, because customers are changing their behavior at this moment. I heard you say, get to know them. Go ahead. You were going to comment, I think.
I was going to say, if you're not in an e-commerce business, you can get to know them personally through things like email and social media as well.
Thank you. Have a presence, because that's where people are interacting. I heard you say, get to know them in ways, reach out to them, empathize with them. What are some ways that we can show empathy as a business for our customer and the dilemma that they have?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of different things we can do with the communication. I think we're seeing it with small businesses, restaurants right now, finding new ways very, very quickly that we can still access the products that they're making. So I think it is really about the connection and understanding what's going on for your customer and then making adjustments so that you can continue to serve them.
Well, thank you. If you have questions about customer relationships you'd like to ask Andrea, go to the chat. I'd like now to go to a very important summation of all of this. We've talked about economics of this. We've talked about the relationships we have with employees. We've talked about supply chain, about customers, about help that's provided. But we still have to manage all of this. And we know Mitt Romney as the head of the Olympics. We know him as Governor Romney. We know him as Senator Romney. We know him as presidential candidate Romney. But what most of you may know, or some of you may not, he is a very seasoned, crisis-seasoned executive who has a lot of wisdom, and he's going to share some of it. Mitt, save our business.
Thank you, Mike, and good to be with all of you today. As Mike alluded to, many of you know me by virtue of my public life and know me associated with the Olympics. What you don't know is why Mike Leavitt considered a guy all the way from Massachusetts, even though I'd been at BYU, why he considered me to come out and run the Olympics. And it was because I was not a public official, but instead I'd spent my business life associated with turnarounds. And at the time, the Olympics looked like a turnaround. And what I'd done, I'd been involved with venture capital to help start some businesses, but more frequently I was involved with buying businesses in trouble, and stepping in and trying to get them on their right feet and make them more successful. And so I have some lessons associated with that experience I'd like to pass along. But let me note this, which is there's nothing like the circumstance you're going through now. I never faced anywhere near the kind of challenge that each of you faces in a setting with a pandemic. I mean, we had downturns, but nothing of a global nature where virtually every business in the country was shut down. So these are challenging times. Don't be panicked by it. I can assure you that many years from now, you're going to look back on this and tell your grandkids about where you were when the great pandemic hit, what you did to save your business and to help people and to save your family. This is history. Everything else may blend into an unclear pattern, but one thing's for sure: this is a moment in time you're going to remember. You have a slide that you're looking at there. A few things I'm going to mention. The first was something we learned anytime we were in a turnaround, which was focus, focus, focus. Decide what was key to keeping our business afloat, making it successful, turning it around, and focusing on those things and stopping doing all the other things. I do recall, for instance, one company, I mentioned the name Vetco Gray there. Vetco Gray was a company that makes subsea wellheads. We bought it for $1, believe it or not, and it lost $72 million the year before we bought it. We, of course, took on the debt that came with the company, but we knew we were in a big hurry to cut costs quickly. We had 3 manufacturing facilities. We decided to close one of them, the brand new one, because it was the high cost facility. Even though it was brand new, we knew that the write-off didn't make any difference because we were just interested in cash, not in the book earnings of the business. So we took pretty aggressive action in that regard. I note that the company had also, prior to our acquisition, they'd fired a lot of the members of the sales force because they were expensive employees and they wanted to make sure that they got their costs down. But we said, this is a turnaround situation. The people we really need are the sales force. So we rehired the sales force and made sure that we were able to build the revenues at a time when the company was facing some tough circumstances. So focus, focus, focus. Decide what's important, and then devote resources to that. The second point I point out there is divide and delegate. Once you decided what's critical to the enterprise, you have to decide what are the specific tasks that need to be dealt with to be able to be successful in each of those areas of concern. And then put in place a task force or a person for each one of those separate items. And the person you put in charge of that particular issue should be a person who's adept at that kind of challenge. Now, I've recognized in my own case that I'm not always the best person to do all the things associated with the turnaround. I brought in other people in some cases who I thought were better than me at doing what needed to be done. And so as you look at the different tasks that have to be accomplished if you're going to be successful in this difficult setting, you may find that you need different talent, move some people around, but make sure you delegate responsibility with clear authority. Make sure these people have marching orders and they report to you at a regular basis with checkpoints as to what they're accomplishing or not. Payables perspective. This has already been touched on, but I'll just mention it one more time. And that is a decision as to who you're going to pay and who you're not going to pay. And you don't just do that willy-nilly. You need to understand who your various suppliers are and the different participants that you owe money to, and what their circumstances are. I took over the business that I had worked in for many years. The founder stepped aside and asked me to take it over in a turnaround setting. We had about 1,000 employees. And I looked at our rent. We had just sent a check for about $2 million to pay for rent for our big facility. And I looked at the facility and I said, no one else is going to want this thing. This is a white elephant facility. The owner of this facility has deep pockets. They're not going to be in trouble with the bank. And so I called the owner and I said, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is we just sent you a check for $2 million for rent. The bad news is I've stopped payment on that check because we simply can't afford to pay you. And we'll pay you again when we can afford it, but we can't for now. Because I recognize that in this circumstance, they were going to kick us out. No one else would step in. We were the best shot they would have of getting rent paid down the road, which ultimately we were able to do. So look at your payables, look at the people you owe money to, and think thoughtfully about which ones you might be able to stretch terms on, others that you might be able to get forbearance from, and so forth. Next topic, receivable strategy. And this has also been touched upon. I think back to the experience that I learned from Mr. Marriott, J. Willard Marriott of the Marriott Corporation. If you go to a Marriott hotel, you notice that almost the only soft drinks you can get there are Pepsi products. And the reason is in 1990, when the company faced a real financial crisis, they went to their main supplier, Coca-Cola, and they said, we'd like some help in stretching our receivables. And, we don't want to have to, they wanted to get their payables stretched. And Coke said no. And Pepsi came to them and said, yeah, we'll give you help. And as a result of Pepsi having allowed them not to pay over some substantial period of time, Pepsi made the decision that allowed Marriott to get the cash that they needed or additional cash that they needed. And as a result, now 31 years later, Marriott still is loyal to Pepsi. So as was said earlier, your decision to give other people some time to pay back your enterprise may well establish a customer relationship, which will be very, very long lasting. The next point that I make is connect and communicate. And I think you recognize this on your own, which is if you don't know what's going on, your fear of bad things is a lot worse than the reality. And therefore, it's really critical in a time of distress to be talking to your bankers, to let them know precisely where you are, to talk to your suppliers, to have them understand where you are, to talk to your employees, even those that you furloughed, to let them know what's happening, to talk to your customers and to tell them what's happening. And in this circumstance, the key is to establish and maintain credibility. Don't tell them pie in the sky kind of things that won't come true. Tell them your very best knowledge, what you hope to be able to accomplish. Under promise and over deliver, but make sure people are hearing from you and understanding the extent of the challenges you have and understand how hard it is you're working to overcome them. And finally, I'll just mention redesign for tomorrow. The world is going to change. Our businesses are going to change in part because of what we've gone through with COVID-19, and your product may need to change. I note one other thing here, and that is I think Utah is getting it right. I think as a nation, we're having kind of a hard time, and we've not been able to contain the disease, and there's a lot of suffering and death that's going on. Washington has not really gone through the kind of process I just described of focusing on key things, assigning tasks to various people, having them report back on their accomplishment of those tasks. I talked to a couple of governors yesterday, and they talked about the frustration they have of getting protective equipment and how everybody's competing with everybody else, and Washington isn't organizing it for them and allocating masks, for instance, to places where they're needed most. It's just disorganized. But Utah is doing it right. And the governor just announced today an effort to do contact tracing. There's only one other state in the country that's really pursuing that in an aggressive way. So look, I think we got a good shot in Utah to lead the nation as we have time and time again. And I'd also note that we have a pioneering spirit in our state. These are challenging times. We face that as part of our heritage. I have confidence that you're going to get it right. And I note that if you have any questions about what the federal government can do, what our programs are, you can go to romney.senate.gov, romney.senate.gov. That will link you to all the federal programs. We keep it right up to date, so you know what you have to do to apply for various loans, forgiveness, and so forth. And we'll be there for you to the extent we possibly can. So, Mike, thanks for letting me participate in this, and to all of you, all the best of luck. We're counting on you.
So, Matt, there are a lot of business owners, large and small, who are going through the anguish of uncertainty. What kind of advice would you give them personally, and how, in terms of how to endure this?
You know, I remember distinctly an experience I had. I was taking a leader of my church. His name was Enzio Buscha. He told me that in his business in Germany, it was a printing business. It was about to go bankrupt. And in Germany, going bankrupt was an enormous loss of face. His employees would be devastated. He was overwhelmed, and he kept praying for God to intercede, praying for God to help him out. And so he stopped his car, went out into a field, and was praying and pleading to God. And he said he heard an audible voice come to his mind. And I wish I could pronounce it in German. I don't remember the word in German, but it was one word: work. Work. He expected that he was going to get an answer telling him that divine intervention was going to step in, but no, the answer was work. All I can tell you is when things are really tough, just work really hard. Get the people around you to have specific responsibilities, get them to work hard. We can work our way through this. And if by some chance we end up not being able to save every enterprise, as I'm sure we can't, well, then recognize we've done our best. But as long as you're working hard and your eye is single on making sure that your enterprise survives and that you help the people who work with you, then you're going to be satisfied when it's all done.
Great advice. I hope you can stick around for a few minutes. We're going to have some questions. We're delighted with the advice we've received. Andrea, I'm sure we must have some stimulating questions for our panelists today on these and other subjects.
Question. So first one goes to you, Governor Leavitt. Can you describe these virus waves with more clarity? Are we talking about additional urgent phases, or are these disruptions as we move through a stabilization and recovery phase?
Thank you. Studying pandemics historically, we come to know that viruses will only, once they're in the wild, the only way they are diminished is when they run out of people or mammals of different types, birds or animals, to inhabit. And that occurs only when a large segment of the population has achieved some degree of immunity. In fact, more than 50% of the population has to have either had the virus and survived it, thereby developing antibodies, or we have to have vaccines, which accelerates that process. And once that occurs, then we begin to see the virus diminish. Now, if you think back, we've had experience with a lot of viruses that have hung around for a long time. The measles, the mumps, the whooping cough, all of those are diseases that many of us experienced as children that lasted for years. Once they're there, we have to learn to manage them. Well, when they get into a place where they begin to peak, and then that peak diminishes, then they will begin to go into a bit of stasis. But at some point in the future, they're going to find a way in which they can become a hotspot again. And in almost every pandemic, we have seen second waves and sometimes a third wave. How long they come apart, hard to know. We can have impact on that by the things we're doing now. But this goes back to the point that just by the nature of the way viruses work and the way pandemics unfold, this is not going to be a one and done scenario. We're going to be dealing with this for a time. This is a problem we will learn more about. We'll learn how it's transmitted. We'll learn how best to deal with it. We'll have medicines. Over time, we'll get better at this. But for the near term, we're going to be managing this, not solving this. That's a very important principle. And I hope that was helpful, Andrea, to the questioner.
Excellent. Thank you. This is a question for Senator Romney. First of all, our viewers are concerned about your health. They know that you've tested positive for COVID-19. So before you answer the question, let us know how you're feeling. And then you mentioned that you thought Utah was getting it right, but what else would you like to see the state of Utah do?
Thank you, Andrea. And the good news is I did not test positive for COVID-19. I tested negative. Ben McAdams, as you know, tested positive and was in the hospital for 8 days, very, very sick, pointing out, by the way, that even if you're young, this may not be a terminal disease for you, but it's a very, very severe one. The key thing I'd like to see Utah doing, and it's on the way to do this, and is getting the resources necessary to do it, is to follow the process which has been used to defeat every other epidemic or pandemic in history. And that's number one, extensive testing of the population. And then when you find people who have the condition, COVID-19 in this case, then you do contact tracing. And that's usually a very difficult thing to do that requires a lot of people to do the contact tracing. But in this case, Silicon Slopes is working together with the governor to put in place a high-tech approach to contact tracing. Once you do that, you can bring people in who've had contact with someone who's been infected. You can test them. And anyone then who has been tested positive, either in the initial test or in the contact tracing, anyone is then isolated from others. If you do those three things, extensive testing, contact tracing, and then isolation, you can knock down the disease. Now it's going to come back again, as Secretary Leavitt just indicated, but you know how to deal with it and you focus on it, knock it down again. That's what's happened in South Korea. South Korea's economy is back to work. They had their first case the same day we had our first case. And yet we're in a position where the crescendo hasn't even peaked yet. They got it done because they did those three things. And Utah is getting the tests necessary to carry that out. And test.utah.gov is a new approach that directs people to where they can get a booth or an outdoor place where they can get tested. If we get people tested, and then Silicon Slopes is going to help us do the contact tracing, we're going to be able to defeat this disease in Utah.
It is that as we move through it, it will be different in different communities at different times. That's part of learning to manage our way through this. Andrea, next question. Thank you, Mitt.
Myles, we're getting a lot of questions about how to treat 1099 subcontractors as they think about all of these options for businesses. Can you go into that in a little bit more detail?
Yep, absolutely. And that's a great question, and one that over the past week, there's been some variance in terms of what SBA has been saying. The way that companies can look at their headcount is that 500 employees, that counts for all full-time, part-time employees, or anybody else that you're paying through your payroll. For 1099s, independent contractors, they would not count towards that 500 employee limit for the Paycheck Protection Program. And one of the reasons why that is because independent contractors can qualify for the program themselves. And so as you're working with your contractors, people you're doing 1099s, they would not expect to be able to be paid through you as a company, through your participation in the PPP program. But they themselves can get online, they can go to their bank, they can go through a process to receive similar support for them and their business, whether they're an independent contractor or a self-proprietor.
Thank you. Andrea, next.
Yeah, this is a question for Scott Schaefer. How should people be thinking about pricing models in such a dynamic, changing market environment?
Oh boy, that is a doozy. Let's see. I think what you're going to see is highly variable demand. And so your demand curves are going to be shifting back and forth depending on exactly what sort of situation we're in with regard to the pandemic. This is a situation where it's going to be very hard to do any analytics around your pricing because the world that you're living in post-crisis may be quite different from the world that you're living in before. And as a result, kind of pricing studies that you've done previously, world might not correspond to those very well. I would say that what you're going to want to do, I think following on some of the information that you were giving, Andrea, which is this is a situation where talking to your customers is going to be just extremely important and trying to understand kind of how sensitive they are to pricing now versus how sensitive they are to pricing variation pre-crisis is going to be extremely important. And so I think the answer to your question, to this question, is communicate, listen, listen. More important now than ever.
Great response to a doozy. Thank you, Scott. Andrea.
Yes. So Steve Alder, couple questions about the virus. Will everybody get it at some point? And then there's been a lot of questions about the idea of getting to herd immunity and if intensive testing and isolating protocols that don't necessarily require the infection rates to get to the herd immunity level. So can you give us a little bit more perspective on kind of how the virus might work throughout the time frame?
Great, thank you. And yeah, that brings a lot of interesting principles together as we think about how diseases like this function within a community. The first question, does everybody need to get it? No, in fact, the suggestion of herd immunity is that once we get above, say, 55 or 60%, then we would expect the virus to hopefully die out. It would still potentially circulate until we have an effective vaccine, and the hope is that we will be able to get there. So our efforts, though, to try and stop the spread of the disease could potentially change that, but that would mean we would need to be very vigilant in some of these efforts. The idea of contact tracing and making sure we get ahead of the infection would be actually a very good opportunity for us to see the impact of the virus be much less than it otherwise would if left to its own devices. And so our efforts to do that and our participation in these sorts of activities could help us not only relieve the amount of burden that society is going to face with the illness components of this, but could in fact help us get back to a lot of the functions that we had pre-pandemic that have now been restricted. We could get back, frankly, to work more quickly.
Thank you, Steve. Andrea, let's go to the next question.
All right, Senator Romney, this is a question for you. It has been mentioned that there will be several start and stop flare-ups with this pandemic. How can the federal stimulus and monetary policy help with those disruptions? And do you expect a second large stimulus package from the federal government?
So let's just assume for a moment.
There we go. Okay, there we go. All right. I think it's difficult to predict exactly what Washington is going to do. I'm confident we're going to need another package of some kind, because I don't think this is going away just in a matter of a couple of weeks. So I would anticipate that there will be a need for additional support for working families, for working individuals, either through unemployment insurance or through the Paycheck Protection Program. There'll be additional need for small businesses, and there's going to be additional loan demand by very large businesses. So I would expect additional demand. The challenge is, can it get through Congress? In some respects, the last rescue package was successful in part because it was so urgently needed that we worked very, very quickly, and people couldn't lard it all up with all their special projects. Now we have time, and we hear that the various politicians are trying to put in place all their favorite programs, and that sort of thing would make it difficult for something to get passed. So I think there will be a need. I hope we're able to cut through the process to be able to get to a point where we can support business and families in the way that we've tried to in this first CARES Act. I'd note one other thing as well. We made mistakes in the first CARES Act. If you haven't figured that out yet, you will soon. And one of them is this. Unemployment insurance in Utah goes to roughly $950 a week. For a lot of our employers, that's more than the people are making while they're working, a lot more. So people are going to want to quit to get advantage of unemployment insurance. Now, you're not supposed to be able to get it if you quit, but no one has the time to really investigate that. So you're going to have to be careful if you've got employees that you need that are not getting paid that kind of money, $950 a week. You're going to have to find a way to make sure they stay on if they're important to you. You may need to increase their pay or give them hazard pay, if you will. And you may need to raise some prices on some of your customers and let them know why you're doing it to be able to keep these key employees. So we got some work to do to correct what we've already done. And I think you'll probably see another round of help down the road, but it's going to be more difficult and more timely than more time consuming rather than the first CARES Act.
Thank you, Mitt. Andrea.
Yeah, there's a couple other questions related to that. First, if you have an employee that's chosen not to work during reasons outside of illness, quarantine, childcare issues, does the CARES Act require us to still pay them to also qualify for PPP forgiveness?
So let's go back to Scott and Myles. Both of you may want to comment on this one. Scott first, Myles second.
I was hoping you'd go in the other direction, Governor. I was going to look up the answer while Myles was speaking.
We give you the doozies and then let him.
Yeah, thanks. Why don't we come back to that question? I'll look up the answer and then I'll be able to.
All right, Myles, do you have any insight into it?
Hey, let's see what Scott comes up with. What I do know is so two things. One, if you've let people go or you're thinking about letting somebody go that sounds like is not contributing right now, you have until June 30th to rehire them to still qualify for PPP. There also is some flexibility. So even if your headcount isn't 100% of what it was before the crisis began, you can still qualify. A, you can get the loan, and B, in terms of the forgiveness, you can still qualify for a significant portion of the forgiveness part of that, even if your head count comes down a little bit. And so there's a few details on the PPP program. And then let's see what Scott's been able to find out here. Maybe we come back to this one in a couple minutes.
We'll give Scott a little time to be researching that. These are highly technical things, but great questions.
But Governor Leavitt, can I make one more quick point? Again, just to reiterate, anybody who has questions like these, very detailed questions, Scott's phenomenal. We'll see what he can come up with. But anybody can go, again, to coronavirus.utah.gov/business, click federal resources, and there's a button right there that you'll see in the center of your screen that says submit inquiry. Click that button, fill out your information, ask your question. We have this rapid response team that's ready and poised to go into very detailed answers or questions just like this and make sure we give you exactly the information you need to make decisions and move forward.
Very good. Scott, we'll check back with you, give you a little more time. Andrea, we'll ask you to give us the next question and then signal us when our time is about up.
Okay, thank you. So Utah has over 10,000 nonprofit organizations that employ tens of thousands of people. Is there anything in the federal stimulus that helps nonprofit entities or any other broader advice for nonprofit entities?
A very good question. I think let's go back to Myles and see if Myles has any information. Perhaps Senator Romney will have knowledge of that. If not, we'll find a way in which to post that later. But Myles, any thoughts?
Yep, absolutely. So for nonprofits, if you are a 501c3, you qualify for everything that we've been talking about today. The PPP program, you can take out that loan, you can get the forgiveness, as well as the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. If you're a 501c6, you can still participate, but you do not qualify for the forgiveness elements of the PPP program, but you get the same benefits as any other company or organization in the country by applying for the EIDL program. And so if you're a C3, move forward with everything we've talked about today, just as if you were a business. If you're a C6, then take a hard look at that EIDL program, fill it out, apply if you need some cash flow assistance, because it's there to help support you and your organization.
Very thoughtful answer. Good. Andrea.
Yes, there are so many sources of information on COVID-19. Where do you get the best information to frame assumptions for your business plan?
Well, I'll mention that we've given a website address. I think there's going to be a number of these rules are so fresh. I think they were published earlier this week and people are still sorting through them. You're getting very good information very quickly, but I think there will be websites that you've been given today as well as others. Myles, you've been Senator Romney indicated that if there are specific matters that need to have his office's attention, you could turn there, or other members of the congressional delegation. I believe there's a state website that's been mentioned where there will be answers. And then Myles, you want to give your website one more go?
Yep, absolutely. So this is the state's website, the task force's website, coronavirus.utah.gov/business. And I'll just also clarify, Senator Romney, he and his team have a tremendous website as well. We are, our team and his team are coordinating every single day to make sure that the information that we have here on the state's website is directly fed from the inside information that we're able to get from Senator Romney and his team.
I might mention that there are benefits for employees of our businesses that are not directly related to employment, that it would be a good idea if we help them know about. For example, there is mortgage payment assistance for those mortgages that are federally insured. You'll want to find those out in a different place, but a good idea for HR to be pointing them out, because it can take a significant amount of pressure off of employees who may in fact have a temporary challenge. Next question, Andrea.
Okay, I believe Scott's ready to answer the question that we had asked him before. So Scott.
Scott, Mr. Doozy will give us the answer to this question.
So just to restate the question, I think the question was, if an employee stops showing up for work, am I required, for reasons other than sick leave or emergency paid family leave, am I required to keep paying that person? I believe the answer to that question is no, but it is important to point out that under the PPP, you have to show that you haven't reduced your headcount or overall payroll expense during the covered period. And so what that means is that if you have an employee who simply stopped showing up for work, you are not required to continue paying that person. But if you do not replace that person, then you may show a reduction in headcount, a reduction in payroll, and that would limit the amount of forgiveness that you're entitled to. However, I would caution everyone, please speak to your bankers about that. Please review on your own carefully the stipulations under the PPP.
Thank you. Andrea?
Yes, this is a question for both you, Governor Leavitt, and Senator Romney. You're both very seasoned business leaders with significant experience running large and small businesses. How do you keep your leadership team and employees positive as we're facing such dire circumstances? The natural human emotion is to hunker down, but businesses need you to be, innovating, reaching out, and thinking of new ways to address the changing world. Any advice for people?
Well, Mitt, would you like to speak to that? And then I will have some thoughts.
Yeah, I'll just say very briefly that people are most enthusiastic and positive if they're doing something that makes a difference and they feel they're making a real contribution. So making sure that you've decided what the key issues are that you got to deal with, and then assigning them to different members of your senior team, and then talking with them basically every day, talking about the progress they're making in those things, the guideposts they have, the challenges they have, working with them together. In a lot of cases, these people may not have had as much interaction with you as you'll be able to have with them now. So a lot of personal interaction combined with giving people tasks to do something meaningful and following up with them as they're carrying out those tasks. That makes people feel like, hey, I'm doing something. I'm making a difference. These are difficult times, but I'll have some influence. I'll have some control. One of the things obviously people fear the most is the lack of control, the sense that something is completely out of their hands. They can't do anything about it. They don't know where it's going to end up. But giving people a task where they can fulfill that task effectively is a way to maintain a strong relationship with them and to maintain the kind of a positive team atmosphere that you'd like to have. Mike?
Oh, actually, mine very closely aligned. I have observed through many difficult moments and crises that I've been involved in that there is great invigoration. Even when there's pain and suffering around, it's not a function of lack of empathy. It's a function of, just as you said, being part of something. There's a great opportunity for managers to discover new leaders. In war, there are things called battlefield commissions when there's a need and someone steps up who hadn't before been seen as a leader. May I say to those who are in businesses, who may have talents that haven't been recognized up to this point, this is a great opportunity for you to step up, become involved, be invigorated by the moment, be part of the solution. These are moments when great leaders are born, when great causes are driven forward, and when great teams come together. Andrea?
Great. We could do these questions for the next 3 hours because we have a lot of them, but I'm just going to summarize this question and then we're going to provide a link so that people can continue to ask questions and then get the materials that we've covered here. So the final question I have for you, Governor Leavitt, or anybody else who wants to answer, can you share the best timeline for all of this? When will we be able to attend a Jazz or Real game or a college sporting event? When will the economy grow again? Any way we should be thinking about this?
Can we just acknowledge that there are things we do not know with certainty, and this is one of them. But I do think it's important, as I suggested earlier, to begin to develop a set of assumptions. Let me just lay some I think, rational assumptions out. The president has indicated that he'll keep the social distancing policy of the national government. Obviously, that'll be responded to by states, and that for at least 30 days. I think we have to acknowledge that because this is just peaking, that there'll be additional hotspots. And I think after the next month or 45 days, that's a long time. That's an uncomfortable amount of time. It's a frightening amount of time, but if that's the amount of time that it takes for us to make certain that this does not become pervasive across the country, then what will happen is we'll start to see hotspots, but they will be more regional in their impact. And there will be at some point, areas that will begin to transition to different levels of social distancing, and that we'll begin to see it walk back. Now, I think we have to acknowledge that probably the last thing that will come back will be large crowd events where we're putting 30,000 people in an arena at the same moment. And I think that's the reason that very wisely the professional sports teams and teams at the collegiate level have made a decision that they're not going to even hold them. This doesn't happen but every 30 or 40, sometimes 50 or 60 years. This is an unprecedented moment. As Senator Romney said, we're all going to look back on this and realize that we've been through a reshaping event around the world. We'll get through this. We'll all learn from this. Normality will return. It may not look exactly like it did before, but that's the history of pandemics. I'd invite others on the panel. Steve Alder, how about the epidemiology of this? Have I stated truth?
Yeah, thanks, Secretary Leavitt. I think you actually summarized it very well. And so we should not think about just going back immediately, but it will go in stages. And I think just to reiterate, it will be the large crowd gatherings that will likely come online last.
Andrea, I think you said our time was up. Can I suggest a summary of things that I heard today? First, start thinking about COVID-19 as a long-term risk that need to be managed, not a short-term issue that we can immediately solve. That's an important principle as we begin to make these decisions. The second is study the CARES Act. There's a lot there, and it will affect your business and your capacity to save your business. Become a student. Number three, contact your banker and the people who are important in the context of financing your business. Be direct with them, be upfront with them, show them a plan, make them your partner, ask for their help. Number four, understand your cash position as it relates to your supply chain and begin to think long term. How will my supply chain need to be different than it has in the past because of these unique circumstances? And then lastly, make decisions regarding your workforce. These are hard, but we live in a place where, in fact, we have a country that is offering that kind of support and a state. Now, I'd like to just say in closing, when I was the Secretary of Health, my office was a few miles from the White House, and every day I would drive between HHS and the White House. And at a particular red light right behind the National Archives, there was a statue of a man of wisdom holding a book. And the inscription on the statue says, "What is past is prologue," a Shakespearean epic. In other words, we learn from times past. I'd like to just mention a couple of things that I believe I have learned from moments like this that I'll just offer to you as advice. The first, this will end. It will end, and we're going to get through it, and we'll be stronger as a country, though undoubtedly different. Number two, be decisive. You don't have to be perfect, but you do have to be moving. Decisions are made when they're directionally correct, and in moments of crisis, it requires that we're constantly reframing our plan based on the best information, but move forward. And finally, I will say, be grateful. Moments like this project a brand new sense of both unity and, I might add, humility upon a nation. We should be grateful that we live in a place where the government has the capacity to be a partner to whatever extent they can to make this, to give us the tools required to make this work. And we live in a state where there's a sense of community. There is invigoration in crisis if we're part of the solution. And my deep suggestion is that we move forward together in a way that's united with an optimism that we will not only save our business, but we will prosper. Thank you, and Dean Randall, back to you.
Well, in the spirit of thanks, thank you, Governor Leavitt. Thank you, Senator Romney. Thank you, George S. and Dolores Dory Eccles Foundation for making this possible. Thank you, Eccles family and Spencer Eccles for initiating this series of seminars. I want to kind of describe what the future looks like. We're going to be having seminars every Tuesday and Friday. This coming Tuesday, we're going to do a deep dive into your workforce decision and the CARES Act. We're going to be doing a set of case studies with businesses who are making these decisions live. I think it'll be insightful and very deep. On Friday, Governor Leavitt's going to be hosting a governor from the Federal Reserve, Randy Quarles. Randy is the one making decisions about macroeconomics here in the United States. He's got an incredible position to see what's going on in the world. And then we're going to take it from that big global view and talk directly to small businesses, how that affects you. We'll have future topics in finance and banking, managers, customers, and supply chains. I'd encourage you to continue to register for these at eccles.link/Mike Leavitt. I also received a quick text here. We have a link that will be going up to answer your questions, eccles.link/COVID. We will try to post answers to questions at that location. We're thankful for you for joining us here today. Keep your wits about you. We're going to get through this together. Thank you very much.